Have you ever met someone for only a few minutes and somehow knew they were hiding something? Not because they said the wrong words, but because something underneath those words felt different. Maybe you noticed the smile that looked practiced, the confidence that sounded rehearsed, or the silence that carried more emotion than the conversation itself. And later, when the truth finally came out, you realized your first impression had been right all along. If this happens to you often, people may have called you an overthinker. They may have told you that you read too much into situations or imagine problems that do not exist. After hearing that enough times, you may have started questioning your own instincts. But what if your mind is not creating stories? What if it is simply noticing details that most people overlook? Psychologists have long suggested that some people naturally process emotional and social cues more deeply than others. They notice patterns, inconsistencies, and subtle behaviors before those signals become obvious. It is less about guessing and more about observing. So, if you have always felt like you can understand people before they understand themselves, this video may explain why. Here are 8 signs you read people better than they read you. 1. You notice emotional changes before anyone says a word. Someone walks into the room looking almost exactly the same as yesterday. They smile, greet everyone politely, and continue with their routine. Yet something immediately feels different. Their voice is slightly quieter. Their movements are slower. Their eyes seem distracted for just a moment. Most people miss these tiny changes. You do not. Others often say you are too sensitive or that you are imagining things. But psychologists describe this as affective attunement, the ability to recognize subtle emotional signals before they become obvious. Your brain is collecting hundreds of small clues without you even realizing it. That is not oversensitivity. That is emotional awareness becoming instinct. You have learned that words are easy. Almost anyone can sound kind, confident, or trustworthy for a few minutes. But actions are much harder to fake. That is why, while everyone else is listening to what someone says, you find yourself watching what they actually do. You notice when someone's smile disappears the moment another person looks away. You notice when their promises never quite become reality. You notice when their body language quietly disagrees with their voice. People sometimes accuse you of being skeptical or difficult to impress. They wonder why you hesitate to trust someone who seems perfectly charming. The reason is simple. Your mind naturally searches for consistency. Psychologists often refer to this as behavioral congruence, the tendency to compare spoken words with nonverbal behavior. When those two things do not match, your brain treats it as important information instead of ignoring it. You are not looking for perfection. You are looking for honesty. That is not distrust. That is perception. Most people focus on what is being said. You also notice what is missing. You notice the question someone carefully avoids answering. You notice the long pause before they respond. If you notice when they suddenly change the subject, just as the conversation becomes uncomfortable. Sometimes silence feels louder than words. Because of this, you often understand the emotional weight of a conversation that other people completely miss. You realize someone is protecting themselves long before they admit they are hurting. Others may say you overanalyze every interaction. They tell you that not everything means something. But researchers studying communication have found that pauses, avoidance, and hesitation often reveal just as much as spoken language. Psychologists sometimes describe this as implicit communication awareness, recognizing meaning that exists beneath the surface. You have learned that people reveal themselves in what they leave unsaid. That is not overthinking. That is listening beyond words. You have probably experienced this more than once. Everyone around you seems impressed by someone. They appear confident, friendly, and successful. The room is drawn toward them, yet something inside you refuses to relax. You cannot explain it immediately. Nothing they say is obviously wrong. But something about their expressions, their timing, or the way they constantly adjust their personality, depending on who they are talking to, feels rehearsed. Months later, People often discover what you sensed from the beginning. It is not magic, it is observation. Psychologists studying impression management suggest that maintaining a false image requires constant effort. Tiny cracks eventually appear in facial expressions, tone of voice, or inconsistent behavior. Most people overlook those cracks because they focus on appearances. You notice the patterns beneath the performance. People have called you judgmental, but you are usually just seeing behind the mask. That is not negativity. That is quiet discernment. Someone casually mentions a dream they gave up years ago. Another person quietly changes the way they laugh whenever a certain name comes up. Someone else insists they are fine, yet you remember they said the exact opposite just a week ago. Most people let these moments disappear. You collect them, not because you are trying to judge anyone, but because your mind naturally connects pieces of information over time. You begin to see patterns instead of isolated moments. And those patterns often tell a more honest story than a single conversation ever could. People sometimes say you have too good of a memory or that you hold on to insignificant details. But psychologists often describe this ability as pattern integration, the tendency to build a larger picture from many small observations. Instead of reacting to one event, your brain compares today's behavior with yesterday's, last month's, and even years ago. That is why your instincts are often right. You are not remembering details for the sake of remembering. You are seeing the story those details create. That is not dwelling on the past. That is seeing the bigger picture. If you have recognized yourself in these signs, there is something you need to hear. For years, people may have made you question your own perception. They may have told you that you are too sensitive, too cautious, or that you think too deeply about everything. Eventually, you may have started ignoring your instincts just to fit in. But the people who notice the most are often the ones who doubt themselves the most, because they know how easily appearances can deceive. So if your inner voice has been trying to tell you something, maybe it deserves a little more trust than you have been giving it. Now, let's look at the final 4 signs. Some people wait until tears appear before they realize someone is struggling. You notice it much earlier. You notice the shorter replies, the forced smile, the sudden distance, the way someone's energy quietly disappears, even though they insist everything is fine. Without thinking, you check on them. Sometimes they look surprised and ask, "How did you know?" The truth is, you probably cannot explain it yourself. Psychologists studying empathy often describe this as anticipatory empathy, the ability to recognize emotional distress before it becomes visible to everyone else. Your brain notices subtle changes that others dismiss as random. That is why people often feel safe around you. You make them feel seen before they ever have to explain themselves. That is not being overly emotional. That is compassionate awareness. Ironically, even though you read people well, you are usually slow to label them. You understand that everyone has difficult days. You know fear can look like arrogance. Anxiety can sound like anger. Confidence can hide insecurity. Instead of accepting the obvious explanation, you quietly observe. You wait. You watch. You let patterns reveal the truth over time. Others may think you are indecisive because you refuse to rush to conclusions. But psychologists sometimes refer to this as reflective social processing, allowing enough time for behavior to become consistent before making a judgment. You understand something many people forget. One moment tells a story. Reports tell the truth. That is not hesitation. That is wisdom through patience. People often ask you how you knew someone could not be trusted, or how you sensed a relationship was falling apart before anyone else noticed. They call it intuition, almost as if you have a mysterious gift. But your intuition is rarely random. It is the result of hundreds of tiny observations your conscious mind never bothers to list. A change in someone's tone, a nervous glance, a promise that sounds different from the last one, a smile that appears just a little too late. Psychologists sometimes describe this as predictive social cognition, the brain's ability to recognize familiar behavioral patterns and quietly predict what is likely to happen next. It feels like instinct because the processing happens below conscious awareness. So when something feels off, it usually is not because you are imagining it. It is because your mind has connected pieces that other people have not noticed yet. That is not luck. That is experience turning into intuition. As we come to the end, think about what these signs have in common. Your sensitivity called overthinking, your caution called distrust, your observation called judgment, your patience called indecision, your empathy called being too emotional. Again and again, people may have mistaken your greatest strength for your greatest weakness simply because they could not see the world the way you do. Reading people is not about having supernatural abilities. It is about paying attention. It is about noticing the quiet details hidden beneath loud personalities. It is about understanding that words are only one part of every conversation. The people who see the deepest are often the ones who speak the least. They observe before they react. They listen before they judge. And because of that, they often understand others long before others understand them. If this video felt like it was describing you, perhaps it is time to stop apologizing for seeing what others overlook. Your ability to notice emotional patterns is not something to hide. It is one of the qualities that makes you a thoughtful friend, a careful listener, and someone people remember long after the conversation ends. So, which of these 8 signs felt the most familiar to you? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video and want more psychology-based insights like this, do not forget to like the video and subscribe for more.